welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Jo Olson. I'm the lead director of communications and engagement here at Fresh Energy, and also your host for most of today's podcast. Thank you to the band Palm Psalms for providing our theme song that you just heard. It is DGAF off of their album O2 Haka. Get the latest from the band at palmpsalm.com. All right, well, today I am excited to be joined by Fresh Energy's Executive Director, Brenda Caselius, our Senior Manager of State and Local Affairs, Anna Johnson, and our Senior Lead of Public Affairs and Advocacy, Justin Fay. Welcome, everyone. Are you warmed up and ready to talk for the most part?
So ready, Jo?
Great.
Ready to go, Jo.
Well, so I thought we'd kick off this Legislative Outlook podcast by first talking to Brenda a little bit about what it takes to be an effective advocate at the Minnesota Legislature. So for this part, I am going to go against my better judgment and turn the mic over to Justin Fay, who I know has some questions for Brenda about her experience and perspective as a former cabinet commissioner and school superintendent. Justin, you're the host now. Take it away.
Wow, you are living dangerously, Jo. I have to say, it's awfully fun to have this opportunity to not be on the receiving end of questions for, I think, the first time in the history of the Decarbonize podcast. So, Brenda, you're going to be in the hot seat for the next 10 minutes or so.
Go easy on me.
Coming out of the historic 2023 legislative session, another big change for Fresh Energy was our new executive director coming on board, and we're so excited to have you here with us today, Brenda. As we kind of jump into the conversation, I'm wondering if you could tell us just like a little bit about your background and how you came to Fresh Energy. And I know you didn't work directly in energy. Energy has been part of your past work in the education field. So wondering if you could just maybe take a moment and introduce yourself to the Decarbonize audience.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jo. And I'm really excited to have a quick little chat with you guys here in the podcast. The team always does just such a great job. So a little bit about me is, I have been in education, started out as a paraprofessional and worked my way up to Commissioner of Education, and just really enjoyed all of the different positions that I was able to hold, either as a teacher or school leader or district leader. And then State Commissioner of Education, had the great opportunity to work with Governor Mark Dayton on policy. So not new to policy making, but new to directly energy policy, except for in my role as superintendent. I'm pretty proud of some of the work that I was able to do in Minneapolis Public Schools. I think that was the first time really that I dabbled in some of the work around transportation and greening our schools and thinking about the impacts that it had on our students and also our communities. And so one of the things that I worked was with Metro Transit and then Mayor R.T. Ryback on how could we get our high school students off of the yellow bus and get them onto Metro Transit buses. And we were able to do that, and it was successful. And now I think St. Paul students are also, high school students are on the bus. And, that teaches kids about ridership and also sends out less emissions. And then in Boston Public Schools, super proud of the work that I did with Mayor Michelle Wu on a $2 billion bond to green our schools, working on HVAC systems and other measures to weatherize our schools and make sure that we have clean air and environmentally sound buildings for our students to go to, particularly temperature controls as well. So we didn't have to cancel school for kids just because it's too hot. So yeah, pretty proud of those initiatives. And then as commissioner, obviously, we worked with the Green Schools Award in Minnesota, and I think we were the very first agency to transition our fleet over to all electric. So pretty proud of some of those accomplishments.
That's awesome. I didn't even know all about all of those things. That's great. As I think our hopefully folks listening to this know, Fresh Energy has a multiple decades long track record of driving policy change through strategic and thoughtful advocacy work. And I'm really one of the things I'm really excited about having you on board leading the team is now we get to draw on your experience as a leader from the public sector, the proverbial other side of the table. I'm wondering maybe if you could share any thoughts with us about any lessons learned for advocates on how to be the most effective when talking to either like elected or appointed leaders.
Well, first, I think I'm talking to one of the pros already, so I don't know that there's a lot of advice I can give to our team because
Oh, stop.
Justin, you guys lead just such a great team. And, I came in knowing the credibility that Fresh Energy has. And so just super proud of this team. It is a bit different, though, as a commissioner and wearing my former commissioner hat. I think one of the most important roles is working with our advocates because to make really sound policy, you have to be listening to our stakeholders, knowing the issues, understanding how the impacts are having from the policy. Because sometimes you get ideas around policy, but you really don't know the true impacts unless you're listening. And it's the folks on the ground who are impacted by our policies who are our best storytellers, who can give us the best feedback on those policies. And sometimes they're new, innovative policies that drive new solutions, and sometimes it's making something better. One of the things that we really prided ourselves in the Dayton administration was taking something good and making it better for more Minnesotans. And so I think being mindful of that as advocates is really important. I think also when you're talking to an elected or an appointed commissioner, that it's really important for you to know your stuff. It's important that you have a balanced view, that you understand all issues on the table, how it's affecting many different regions of the state, not just metro or rural, suburban, or exurban, that you're really thinking clearly about who is going to be benefiting or impacted by those policies that you are putting forward. And then also knowing what the opposition to those is, and why are they opposed? Because sometimes when you work with your opposition and you can find really common ground in what you're trying to do. It's just really the means to getting there. So it's trying to really understand that piece. And then I've always said, and I felt really bad because the commissioner is pretty busy and their staff is very busy. So you want to make sure when you do get a meeting with the commissioner that you don't run out of time, that you get to your ask within the first 5 to 10 minutes. And, it's always good to have just a little bit of data and evidence and them knowing who you've already talked to on the issue and who's aligned with you and who isn't aligned with you, and bring that to the meeting.
Absolutely. Those are great tips. And what you were saying about being really aware of how what you're working on or advocating for affects different people and who's affected by it feels like just a really foundational piece to the work we do at Fresh Energy. One of our core principles is ensuring that our advocacy approach is inclusive and that the policies we advocate for are equitable and grounded in equity. How have you approached equity in your past roles as a public leader?
Well, I've been really privileged, and I am really glad that you're asking this question because it's one of the reasons that I really chose to work at Fresh Energy was its upfront social justice mission within the core mission of decarbonizing our economy. And so I am super excited to work with a team that is really vigilant and committed to this, Justice 40 goals, committed to ensuring that those who are least served get the best services and quality, and that we're uplifting them in all that we do as we think about the policies that we put forward, as we think about our work and where our resource and our own personal effort goes. So super important to me personally. Also, as a African American woman, it is even more important to me, I think, just personally, as I think about my role, and what I do, as I try to live a purpose-driven life to make the world better, to make it fair and more just for many different types of groups of individuals, throughout Minnesota and throughout the nation. So I feel that Fresh Energy allows me to continue to lift up my core purpose for being in this world, and also to have a sense of place now in this new kind of space of energy, and making sure that that is lifted up here at Fresh Energy. I think as I think about my role as the leadership in the leadership team of Fresh Energy, part of that is just always having front and center a lens on everything that we do, and making sure throughout the organization that staff themselves feel comfortable and at Fresh Energy, and that we're very protective of our culture at Fresh Energy, that it's very welcoming, and that it's diverse, and that we're seeking diversity within our staff, and that we're reflective of the community that we serve. I think that's really important for me as an ED. And then I think also just that anything that we've forward has gone through a lens of looking at racial equity and gender equity, and economic equity, and making sure that there's a deep fairness in that. And so very, very much committed to that. And I think already the team is, and that's what really attracted me to Fresh Energy and to the role of ED at Fresh Energy.
I think that's a common sentiment among our staff. An awful lot of us really value that about this organization, and I know a lot of our supporters and allies do as well. Pivoting a little bit and thinking about the 2024 legislative session that's just right around the corner. One of the higher profile issues is pretty likely to be a bonding bill. And for those of you listening, a bonding bill is a piece of legislation where the state makes investments in infrastructure like public buildings, could be things like wastewater treatment, transportation infrastructure, roads, transit ways, hopefully more transit ways and less roads, but both. Brenda, as a former agency commissioner, you've seen this process from the inside. What can you tell us about your perspective on the opportunity presented by bonding, and what that process is like as a former commissioner, and how a year like this year, where there's no budget but there is something like a bonding bill, how is a year like this one maybe a little bit different?
Well, the great thing about the way that Minnesota legislature works is that you have opposite years of funding and policy and bonding. And so that gives you a sense to be able to pause, and to really be more reflective about the needs of the state, I think, and to seed new ideas, and try new ideas. Oftentimes there's a lot of planning commissions that are put together, or commissioner working groups that are done during this year to get you ready for the big year where you are looking at your biennial funding that you're going to be doing, and and the outlooks for that. I would say the best thing to do is to try to get into the governor's bonding bill. I think that's your best hope and chance of getting something done, because the needs are so vast, right? I mean, we have a really old infrastructure in Minnesota. There's lots of needs regionally across the state. And so you want to be able to get your ask in early, because I think that that's really important. I think also the political dynamics of the legislature are a little bit different. Certainly there's a trifecta in our government right now in Minnesota. However, the margin of the majority also makes a difference on what gets passed, particularly in an election year. And so, you want to think about, the timing of your ask, and, are there certain seats that are open in any area where, you think they're going to get some favoritism for, for their projects, because either they haven't had a bonding appropriation in many, many years, or because there's some political reason why, the legislature is feeling as though this particular representative or senator could could use a little bump. So, just making sure that you're aware of any of the politics on that. And I would say that if it doesn't get in this year, not to worry, that no time wasted in these relationships and making sure that your ideas get heard. It's to all time really well spent because you're on the radar now. So, and that's true for any policy, any funding request. Any time that you can spend with the legislator is time well spent. I've found that they're very good listeners. They want to listen to the community. They want to make good policy. They didn't knock on doors and get elected, for the glory, because it's not a very high paid job. Most of them, if not all of them, are really, public servants and care a lot about Minnesota. I mean, obviously, we may have different ideas on policy or different ideas on how to get there, but I truly believe, after my 8 years in the legislature, that these are good people, regardless of what side of the political fence they sit on, and that they want to do good for their communities and they want to do good for Minnesota. So I'm optimistic about our legislature. I'm optimistic about our position in Minnesota, and I'm optimistic about the role that Fresh Energy gets to play in influencing a lot of really good policy around energy and equity within this space.
Awesome. That's really well said. We're recording this, we're just a few weeks away from the 2024 legislative session starting, and it's a little bittersweet because that means that the clock is ticking on how much longer we can talk about this spectacular 2023 legislative session that we had in Minnesota and here at Fresh Energy in particular. We really did have just a historic set of accomplishments in the last legislative session, and those breakthroughs came on top of major investments that have happened over the last couple of years at the federal level through the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and more. Since last session ended, there's been just a ton of pressure on our state agencies like the Minnesota Department of Commerce to implement, frankly, a historic number and volume of new programs and unprecedented new funding. Brenda, as a past agency commissioner yourself, what are some of the challenges that come with and just an enormous influx of dollars like this from both the state legislature and the federal government? And what do you see as Fresh Energy's role in terms of supporting or facilitating that implementation?
Well, let me just say this as a former commissioner: be careful what you ask for, right? Because when you get these big wins like this, you know that it's going to mean a lot of work and a lot of change management for your organization. We had passed World's Best Workforce, which was allowing, not allowing, but really kind of compelling school districts to write a strategic plan, align all of their work around the achievement gaps, and make sure that their resources are aligned to that. And it was a huge undertaking that came to the agency without much funding at all. Matter of fact, I think there was a goose egg of funding for that initiative for the agency. And so, even though it's a huge opportunity, and there's really large expectations that are put on the commissioner and his or her staff, I think it's still incumbent upon them to develop a plan, to get the hiring, to develop, partnerships, sometimes with the AG's office and others, around rulemaking and guidance. And it just depends on what the legislation is calling for. Sometimes there's working groups that have to be done and developed. So it's a lot of administrative overhead work in planning and ramping up of staff. And that just takes a lot of time. And the expectation of the public, like for instance, with the EVs, they're like, okay, there's this EV rebate, I'm ready to start shopping for cars tomorrow, right? But it takes a lot of time for the agency to try to figure out a really fair way to make sure that those dollars go out, that they go out fairly, that there's accounting for those dollars. And that there's no mismanagement or anything like that can come up. So you're always really, really super careful and double checking your work there. So I think that, as you think about the programs that got passed in 23, it's not just funding from the state, though, that a state agency is responsible for. For instance, the IRA passed, and so now they're also administrating all of this federal funding that's coming in, and two types of different regulatory processes and practices that need to be accounted for. So it's can be super complicated to the public. They're trying their best to plain language it for everybody in a time frame that manages expectations and still holds us all accountable to a steep focus and sharp focus on equity and making sure that those dollars get out to those who need them the most, which is the job of government, is to sit in that space of really helping Minnesotans who maybe need a little extra bump with some of these incentives and rebates.
Well, it really can be sometimes, I think, a thankless job for folks that work in government, but it's just so important that we get this right because we have so much more to do, right?
Well, it's a hard job. I got thanked a lot when I was the commissioner. We were able to set up a preschool for 25,000 kids. And I mean, there's just so much great opportunity. I really love the job. And I've loved the job of being principal. I love the job of being a superintendent. I think doing public service is just incredibly rewarding. And I know people say it a job, and I know people say that it's thankless. But you get the reward when you see the benefit, when you see people and Minnesotans moving ahead. And so I get really excited about public service roles, public policy roles, and I realize the power of policy. Not everybody really does. And I think that, that the Minnesota Legislature has the power to do a lot of good for Minnesotans. And I'm really proud of our state, and I'm proud of the work that Fresh Energy does.
Awesome. Well, that pivots us nicely into our last question I have for you, Brenda. So we're about 9 months into your role here at Fresh Energy and about to start our first legislative session with you at the helm. So I'm just sort of curious, what have been your reflections at this stage in your journey so far, and what are your hopes for the future?
Well, it's been pretty amazing. Michael built an amazing team, and I'm just grateful to him for 30 years of incredible leadership at Fresh Energy. So I tip my hat to Michael. I'm sure he's enjoying his rewirement. And now, as we move into strategic planning for Fresh Energy, we're looking forward to going deeper into our work, particularly in the industry and ag sections, I think, is an area that I keep hearing about. Local government is another area, and really implementing the really great work that's already been done on the policy side. So Fresh Energy will play a key role in that, and I have both the public policy side and the side of knowing how to implement public policy. And so I hope that I'm able to lend some of that to our team here and provide a really clear plan forward. And I think it's an exciting time for Minnesota, and I think it's an exciting time for Fresh Energy.
You're here. Well, thank you so much, Brenda. Session hasn't even started yet, and I'm already excited and just super confident that we're in for just a stellar year yet again. So with that, I am grudgingly going to hand control of the microphone back to the inimitable Joe Olson.
Thank you, Justin.
Grudging, Justin. I take that personally. Hosting this podcast is a great honor, and you should feel fortunate that I trusted you to do it. And, maybe in the future, you can host more often. Is that what we're working toward here?
Well, let's not rush to any hasty conclusions here.
Well, you did really well. So thank you so much to you and Brenda. That was actually a really fun discussion, and it was cool to look like under the hood at how some of these processes behind the scenes at the legislature and at our state agencies work. But before we start talking shop for this year, let's talk about last year. So maybe you two remember a few things happened. We had 100% clean electricity, dollars for the state competitiveness fund to unlock even more federal money, the electric panel upgrade grant program, EV infrastructure and incentives, accelerated commercial energy codes, the Frontline Communities Protection Act, buy clean, buy fair, green fertilizer. And that's just naming a few, but it was a real mouthful. So let's think about last year. We're not going to be able to talk about everything. We're not going to recap everything. But Anna, what was one of your favorite things if you had to choose from last year? And then Justin, you go next.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's really hard to choose because there were dozens of new programs set up across several agencies, and unprecedented investment in climate programs. And, there are also some really key policy changes as well, including updating the statewide, economy-wide decarbonization goals to match what the most current science says and where we need to go. I think one of my very favorite programs that the state invested in is what's known as pre-weatherization. Pre-weatherization, I assume most people listening to this, if you're listening to this, you're probably enough of a wonk that you know what weatherization is. It's protecting your home against the elements. So think like insulation, storm windows, air sealing, doors, making, keeping the elements out and the heat and air conditioning in. So the state invested a little over $45 million in what's known as pre-weatherization. So before you can qualify for weatherization, your home has to be kind of in good enough order that the federal government is willing to put money into it. So if you have something like a broken window or an issue with a house, or if you have rodents or, stuff that just like kind of happens when you're living in your house. Especially if you're low income, you might not be able to fix these things as they come up. It can preclude you from being able to access weatherization assistance. So the state invested $45 million in helping folks solve these things that can prevent them from accessing weatherization. So it's just a really, really great low income program. There's so many co-benefits of weatherization. Energy efficiency lowers monthly costs. It makes your home more comfortable. It's a quality of life thing. If you're kind of just like huddled in your home during the winter, kind of waiting for it to pass, it's a much less enjoyable season than if you're well insulated. And importantly, weatherization is a really critical first step for electrification. And it also reduces greenhouse gases. So it just kind of makes our homes more resilient, lowers monthly income or monthly bills. And I love energy efficiency. And I thought it was a really great use of state funds to allow more people to access those federal dollars.
Well, I thought I knew what I was going to answer, Anna, but you might have just persuaded me to change my mind. Pre-weatherization sounds awesome. But there's another program that we worked really hard on that I'm also proud of, and that's a new grant program that helps support homeowners in upgrading the electric panels in their homes. And it's not the flashiest climate issue that has ever existed, but it's a sneaky impactful one. For a lot of especially moderate income single family homeowners, the way you approach electrification is, as your existing aging gas appliances fail, you replace it hopefully with something that's a new electric appliance, because that's what you can afford to do, and you need to get the lifetime sort of value out of the appliances you have in your home. And what we have been hearing from folks over a number of years now is that there's this like sort of sneaky surprise that kicks in some cases, especially in older homes, where you have your contractor out to the house to talk to you about your new heat pump water heater or whatever it is that you're really excited about, and they tell you, in addition to your pump water heater, you have to upgrade your panel in order to be able to install it, and that can be a $2, $3, $4,000 of cost that isn't in your budget, and that becomes a real barrier to a lot of folks who really are committed to electrification and want access to new emerging technology that has a lot of potential for, as you were describing for pre-weatherization, just like quality of life in your home. So I love that we were able to get that done. We were able to work with legislators to approve a pilot program to provide grants based on income eligibility for folks to do electric panel upgrades, and really excited to see that program get off the ground here, and hopefully in the near future.
Wow. So the two of you, when you think about last year, you're like totally on the energy transition train. So that's like weatherization, electric panel upgrades. I love it. And there's just like so much opportunity in that area last year too. And like I said earlier, we're not going to summarize all of session last year. We've got a blog post that does that. But now, we're going to look ahead to this year. And Justin, for those of our listeners who are also listeners of NPR, they might have heard you on the radio with Kirsty Marone talking about energy policy. Was that last week, I think? Yeah, am I remembering right? Okay.
I believe you are.
It's all a blur. Well, so the upshot of last year's legislative session was that our elected leaders at the Minnesota Legislature cleared the decks, for lack of a better term. So typically, policies take a few years to pass and become law, but we had some jet through from start to finish last session. So that means that we get to start with kind of a blank slate, which is a pretty unprecedented opportunity. So the sky's the limit, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes and no. I think it's a really cool opportunity that I don't know that I've really experienced in the time that I've been working in public policy, where we really did check off a lot of boxes. I wouldn't say that we did everything, but we did an awful lot of stuff. And I think maybe an undertold story from the 2023 session is how many of those policy proposals and ideas and programs were really multiple years in the making. And, of course, the composition of the legislature and things happening at the federal level, there are a number of factors that had to come together in order for us to have the success that we did. But a really important part of it was just the years of work that not just Fresh Energy, but this like great ecosystem of climate and energy advocates that we have in Minnesota had been really committed to for a long time. And I know we have Fresh Energy supporters and donors listening to this podcast, and I really can't emphasize enough how impactful your support has been in allowing us to sustain the kind of multi-year commitments it takes to deliver wins like this. So
Yeah.
It's like kind of exciting and scary, right, Anna?
Yeah, no, it's both. As you said, there's definitely more to do. But yeah, the decks have been somewhat cleared, and that's really significant because there are just several sessions of vetting and honing policy language for some of these bills. The 100% bill comes to mind, which had been voted off the House floor twice, and had gotten updates each time it was introduced. So yeah, it's an exciting moment. There's definitely some exciting ideas and some big ideas floating around that we're a part of, and we'll see kind of what the level of ambition is for the legislature this year, and what sort of rises to the surface as highest priority.
And of course, I think that the challenge, of course, is like there's going to be some things where we have to, because the decks are cleared, we have to sort of start the clock and start working on building these sort of longer term coalitions for the next frontiers of climate work. But also, there's a lot of urgency to move fast on climate, and so I think for advocates like our organization, we're really going to be trying to strike that balance of, both maximizing the short-term opportunities of the session that we're just walking into or about to start, and being really strategic about laying the groundwork to make sure that the next tranche of big climate wins are as impactful as they can be.
Exactly. Well said. And so aside from kind of a blank slate, a partially blank slate, so what's going to make this year different from last year? Anna, so I'm going to start with you since you basically lived at the Capitol last year. So how is this year going to be different? What data session even start? Like, can you kind of get us spun up on what this year's going to look like?
Yeah, happy to. I did spend a lot of time at the Capitol last year. It's very beautiful. A lot more marble there than there is in my own home, which was delightful. So yes, this year looks a little bit different. It's the second year of a 2-year cycle of the biennial cycle. So the legislature passes a 2-year budget. So this is the year that they will pass a supplemental budget, kind of like squaring everything and dotting the I's and making sure all the accounts are where they need to be. But it's not going to be a really large budget bill that passes. So that's a major difference between this year and last year. Last year we had an unprecedented surplus to work with in the state. I think it was 17 billion. Is that right, Justin? Something like that.
I think that's about right.
And this year it's essentially nearly, not quite zero, but basically we're setting the expectation that there's not that much money to be working with. And then the session is much shorter. So last year, the first year of the cycle started first week in January. And this year it's starting February 12th. So we have 6 fewer weeks to get the business done. And to advocate for what we're working on. And usually the even year is referred to as a policy and or a bonding year. So because there's less money to work with, they focus on policy changes, that don't cost any money to the state. And they work on passing a capital budget bill or a bonding bill, which is, state funded public infrastructure projects. So those are the main differences. And I guess I'll also mention too that, it's an election year for the House, not for the Senate. So that also kind of colors just the kind of tactics of the body, and also for individuals who are either running for re-election or choosing not to run for re-election. It kind of colors and impacts what goes on. Also, there's some construction going on at the state office building. So the tunnel is going to be closed between the state office building and the Capitol. I personally don't mind that so much. I kind of like going outside, and I think it'll be fun to kind of scurry around.
That just to be clear, that's Anna's individual opinion. That is not an organizational opinion.
We should take a vote. We should take an internal vote on this. And Anna, refresh my memory. Is this your 5th year working at the Capitol for Fresh Energy?
That's a good question. My first was in 2019.
Yeah.
6th year, I think, for Fresh Energy. Oh, time really flies.
Well, time flies when you're having fun, I guess. And
So much
fueled
fun.
by coffee from the Capitol cafeteria, which I know you're probably pretty excited to get back to. Yeah, I assume you both love the food at the Capitol.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah. They've got a great salad bar. Their raw vegetables do not disappoint.
A little insider tip for those of you that maybe want to come to the Capitol at some point. If you come, anytime after around late March through the end of the legislative session, that's food truck season for those of us that worked at the Capitol complex. The moods lighten considerably once the alternatives wheel themselves up outside the building.
Remember the dark days before food trucks? Anyway, that's a whole different political can of worms, isn't it? So let's talk.
Fun
Yes.
fact, Joe. There's a number of us who used to go have lunch at a hospital cafeteria next to the Capitol because it was the best option within walking distance of where we work every day.
I have to go back for old
Hospital.
time's sake, I guess. Well, cafeteria food aside, be it hospital or Capitol, I'm wondering, Justin, if you can fill us in on the general administrative comings and goings for us to look for.
Sure. Well, as Anna mentioned, it's not a budget year. These kind of second year of the 2-year cycle sessions tend to be shorter. And so this year's February 12th start date is it's about 6 weeks later in the year than session started a year ago. In my experience, the way that usually happens is you end up doing about the same amount of work. It just gets compressed into a much shorter time period. So these shorter sessions can be sort of like shockingly and often unexpectedly intense, but they come and go pretty quickly. And the more you're able to work ahead and be on top of things running into session, those are the folks who tend to have the best outcomes in an off year. One thing that's I guess I don't even know what the right word is, convenient, cool, nice for those of us that do advocacy work is there's not a lot of changes in the legislature. The committee structure is the same as what we have in 2023. The committee chairs are the same. There's always maybe like a tiny little bit of turnover, and so I think there's been 1 or 2 retirements or resignations in the legislature since last year, and there's a little bit of shuffling around in committee membership that happens. But for the most part, you really do hit the ground running when they come back, because the legislators have all been through it for a whole session already. They're chomping at the bit to take another swing at things that they didn't get done last year or new ideas that have bubbled up since the previous session. And that kind of first month to month and a half of the session is going to be really, really crazy. So the legislature operates with these kind of self-imposed deadlines. They're called committee deadlines, and they're like kind of mile markers that individual bills have to reach certain points in the legislative process in order to be considered alive and viable for the year. And there's probably only going to be something like maybe 6, maybe 7 weeks between when the legislature starts and when those deadlines occur. And that means everything that we want to do has to have all of their committee hearings done in that pretty short window. So Anna and I are going to be we're going to be busy.
Well, actually, I wonder, maybe you could mention too, it's you and Anna, but there are a couple more members of the team too. So do you want to let folks know who will be showing up for Fresh Energy at the Capitol this year, aside from policy staff testifying, of course?
Well, we have a really deep bench across the board, and we're super proud of our team. So Anna and I are the kind of full-time staff presence at the Capitol. We're really fortunate to work with a contract lobbyist, a gentleman named John Burns, who's been with Fresh Energy in a contract capacity since 2014. I believe at this point he is more tenured with Fresh Energy than all but 2 of our staff, which is pretty. That's a luxury that we really don't take for granted. And John's been just a really wonderful ally and former legislator himself. He was a suburban moderate Republican who served in 2006 and 2007. And we also have Bryn Kersling, who's our senior manager for advocacy campaigns. If you get, those of you who are Fresh Energy supporters, you may get text messages a handful of times a year from us with really, really urgent, high-level opportunities to speak up or participate. That's Bryn's doing that work, as well as helping our communications team and Joe and her colleagues build out our action network and make sure that we're really delivering the highest impact opportunities for climate advocates and supporters like those of you listening at home to participate in the legislative process. And then the newest members of our team are Laura Wagner, who's our session associate, and Kathleen Mason, who will be our Capital Pathways intern this year. And they're both going to be with us through the 2024 session, and that'll round out our team for this year.
Perfect. Thank you. Great job. You have great roster hype. We should make you an announcer at like a game or something. Okay, so should we pivot to Justin, your favorite subject, legislative goals and priorities? I know you don't always have like a thorough list of like all of the legislative priorities because there are just like so many, and we end up doing, things come up like mid-session and it changes and evolves. But I know a semi-comprehensive legislative agenda is kind of down on paper for the 2024 session. So nearly everything on this year's agenda, if I can call it that, is new in contrast to 2023, when most of our priorities had been vetted, Anna, as you mentioned, for multiple years. So no, I know you're not going to include it all, and in no particular order. Anna, why don't you start by telling us what you are thinking about for this year as like observers of the process? And then Justin, maybe you can jump in during or after, but I just want to know what you guys are thinking agenda-wise coming up.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. That's a great question. Well, one of the things we're taking a look at is the residential building energy code. You mentioned earlier that one of the things the legislature updated last year was the commercial building energy code. So we're moving to and focusing this year on the residential energy code. So basically, the energy code is a statewide code that sets the baseline for technical details related to how a building is constructed, such as wiring and energy efficiency, insulation, windows, kind of stuff like that. Eric Fowler knows much more in detail about all the ins and outs of those kind of things. So the way the commercial energy code update was structured last year was it said that by 2036, the energy code will have achieved 80% reduction in energy usage based on a particular model code from the early 2000s. We're interested in updating the residential energy code to do something quite similar, because if we need to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 or sooner, if we can, it means that we need to construct buildings that won't hold us back from that goal. We build buildings that'll last for at least several decades, so we need to be really planful and look ahead at how they're constructed, because the buildings that we're putting in the ground now and in the near future need to be ready to be zero emissions, if not zero emissions, right from the outset. So this is a really exciting and important policy that we're going to be working on this year.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity. I'm not going to quote the exact statistic because I can't remember it, but when you stop and think about it, our goal is net zero economy wide by mid-century, and the reality is most of the buildings that are going to exist in 2050 have already been built, and we're continuing to build new buildings that are not net zero and are not net zero ready, and that's a huge problem that we have to get real about.
Absolutely. And so, Justin, I've heard you talk about how we have made and how we continue to make progress in the power sector. But what we're looking at for the legislature in 2024 and beyond is for our electeds to really dig into what it means to eliminate emissions everywhere else, like you were just saying about buildings, Anna. So especially with an emphasis on continuing to shift toward areas of decarbonization beyond the power sector. So in this area of focus, let's talk first about the clean lighting law, which will be maybe a new buzzword for the folks here listening to the podcast.
Yeah, well, this is a great example of a targeted policy that addresses a really specific problem in a really simple way and delivers multiple benefits. So this is another initiative that our colleague Eric has been leading on and doing a lot of work with a number of really impressive partners. Um, and it's modeled on policies that about half a dozen other states have already taken around the country. So there's a model out here for Minnesota that has already been proven. And it's really simple. It's phasing out um, all light bulbs that contain mercury. So those, if you remember, 15, 20 years ago, CFLs were all the rage, and those fluorescent lights that you might be accustomed to seeing in office buildings. Um, we have we have better technology now. We have better alternatives, and sending a really clear market signal that we're going to fully complete our transition to LED and other clean, like truly clean lighting alternatives is on the deck for discussion in the 2024 session. It's actually a bill that we introduced at the end of last session, so it's primed and ready to go, and we're really grateful to be working with a really great team of authors, Representative Hemmingson Yeager in the Minnesota House and Senator Nicole Mitchell in the Minnesota Senate.
Perfect. Thank you. And Anna, along these lines of moving beyond the power sector, so we're also talking about a grant program for electric yard equipment, right?
Yeah, this is an exciting one. So we're working with Community Stabilization Project on this idea. Community Stabilization Project is a fantastic partner organization. They work with kind of organizing tenants and helping to prevent homelessness and increasing kind of awareness around like tenant opportunities and responsibilities and help keep people in their homes by managing monthly costs and providing safe and affordable housing. So we're working with Metric Giles there on an idea that will help allow folks who maybe can't afford to purchase an induction stove or an electric vehicle, but who are interested in the transition to electrification, and provide an opportunity for them to be part of that transition through a grant program for lawn care and snow removal equipment. So think like lawnmowers, snow blowers, leaf blowers, that kind of thing. And it's an exciting program because it provides opportunity and access to these devices, as well as it has some really significant air quality benefits. Gas-powered appliances or tools are really bad, just have really bad air quality issues for those using them and for those around them. So there's a lot of dual benefits there that we're excited to stand up.
Cool. Thank you. Well, let's turn to buildings. I guess buildings are kind of like a cool thing that we've been talking about today. So if we think about buildings, this also aligns with our goal to decarbonize beyond the power sector. That's kind of like a theme for this year, I guess you could say. Justin, do you want to talk about schools, but then also talk about bonding in terms of buildings?
Absolutely. So, schools are a really interesting opportunity. We've had a lot of success or seen a lot of success at the state level in Minnesota with the Solar on Schools program over the last few years. It's been wildly popular. And it makes a lot of sense for a bunch of reasons, right? Like when you think about schools, that's in a lot of communities around the state, the local like high school is probably going to be one of the larger buildings in the community. It might be centrally located in the community. It's a local landmark that people know and has high visibility. And you deliver when you improve quality of life and kind of economics of operation at a school, you're delivering a whole bunch of different benefits. You're reducing the overhead costs of education. You're providing emissions benefits. You're providing educational opportunities for the students and staff that use the building, providing health benefits for people that are in the building. So when we talk about schools, the sky is really the limit in terms of what we can do. And we just heard earlier in this podcast from one of the leading education experts in the entire state of Minnesota, who just happens to be Fresh Energy's new executive director. So it would be silly for us not to get serious about looking at the school community and sector for where we can be an asset and help deliver some of those multiple benefits. So I think for 2024, we're really thinking about kind of baby steps. Are there some additional tools and flexibility that we can give schools and school districts to be able to drive some of those investment decisions in their physical infrastructure on their own? And that's really kind of laying the groundwork for what we hope can be a robust new area of focus for Fresh Energy in the years to come. And you also asked about bonding, and I love to talk about bonding. I'm going to give you the really abridged version here. When we talk about bonding, almost every dollar that we spend in the bonding bill can or should be a climate investment. The state of Minnesota has something called SB 2030, which is Sustainable Building Guidelines that were developed at the University of Minnesota, and they're designed to kind of ratchet up over time, meaning that building performance that's required in order to comply with those standards becomes more stringent as the years go by. Projects that get funded with state bonding dollars are required to meet those SB 2030 guidelines. And what that means is when we invest bonding dollars in what might look like really boring run-of-the-mill investments, like a new office building for state agency X, Y, or Z, you're probably getting a lot of energy savings with that investment, because that building is going to be built well above code. It's going to be built as a high-performing, high-quality building that's not going to be obsolete in just a few years. And so we're always going to be at Fresh Energy really full-throated advocates for going big on bonding, and let's maximize those opportunities, particularly for buildings, but then all the other things that you can do that are infrastructure with the bonding bill, whether that's continuing to invest in our transit ways, charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, and the list goes on.
I can just see like an ad, like a t-shirt, a staff t-shirt, go big on bonding. That'll be a maybe in the works. Well, now, of course, I'd like us to transition to the hardest to decarbonize sectors, because those are also on the table at the legislature this year. And what I'm talking about is industry and agriculture. So what is cooking in that area, Anna?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yes, as you mentioned, these two sectors are very difficult to decarbonize. We basically know how to decarbonize the power sector, and industry, as you go down the list, is going to be the tougher nut to crack. But there's some exciting things happening for sure. In relation to agriculture, fertilizer production is a very energy intensive process. But there's some really exciting state-funded research that's happening out of the University of Minnesota Morris with Mike Reese, looking at green fertilizer, so using green hydrogen to produce fertilizer. There's a lot of potential there, and that's also an opportunity for some industry growth in Minnesota. Most of the fertilizer is produced down south. So it's an opportunity for, some new investment and expansion in Minnesota. And then in terms of just kind of industry in general, in relation to green hydrogen, it's an emerging but very important aspect of decarbonization. There are some major tax credits for hydrogen in the Inflation Reduction Act, and folks have kind of been waiting with a lot of expectation on the Department of Energy, who's been working on how to structure those really billions of dollars worth of tax credits for hydrogen, and what kind of level of carbon intensity qualifies for those credits. The proposed guidance for that came out in late 2023 and has yet to be finalized. Overall, it's looking pretty good at this point, but it isn't yet finalized, and it's definitely something that is quite wonky, but will have a huge impact. So definitely keep your eye on that. Also, relatedly, if you would like to keep your eye on it, at Fresh Energy, we have a position open to work on what's the title of the job position, Joe or Justin?
Is it managing director, industry?
I think,
Is that
yeah,
right? Yeah.
that sounds great. Yeah, I think that's right. Priority deadline is January 26th. So I'll put a plug in for working at Fresh Energy. It's fantastic. We're pretty nice here and we like to get stuff done. So if you want to come work with us, consider applying for that position.
And Joe, what's the website for people?
Gosh,
if
I
they want
think,
to learn more?
if I had to recall it, I think it's fresh-energy.org. That sounds right.
Let's make sure I've got that fresh-energy.org.
Yeah, to come sign up and apply to work on our industry team with Margaret Turney Hendrick. Who doesn't want that? Okay, so let's zoom out and think about some of our partner collaborations, because we do not ever go it alone at the Minnesota Legislature. We definitely have bills that we're running, we're point on, that we've cooked up at Fresh Energy, but there's so much collaborative efforts that happen across partner organizations and coalitions. So question for both of you, are there any bigger tent collabs that you're especially excited about?
Well,
Who wants to start?
I'll take a first stab at this, and I want to echo what you just said, Joe. That I think that every single thing, issue, topic, idea that's been mentioned since we started our conversation today is something that we do in a collaborative setting. There's an entire ecosystem of partners, of environmental advocates, equity advocates, economic and justice advocates, labor unions, business, utilities, public entities, local governments, that are all collaborative and interrelating and complementing each other. And it's that sort of dynamic environment that really allows Minnesota to thrive. And the fact that our state is a leader is a testament to all of that sort of broad community engagement that we are fortunate to have here. An issue that comes to mind that is definitely collaborative and has a really interesting kind of set of partners working on it is something called a clean transportation standard. And that's a policy that Fresh Energy has been working on for several years now, alongside a number of partner organizations. What it is it's a policy that sets statewide carbon intensity target, and then assigns a score to each individual type of transportation fuel based on the carbon intensity of that fuel. So whether that's gasoline or petroleum based transportation fuels, biofuels, which is a significant economic sector in many parts of Minnesota, or electricity, which is a transportation fuel that we're pretty excited about at Fresh Energy, and then ratchets down what that carbon intensity can look like or be capped at over time. And so you get statewide carbon emission reductions from the transportation sector, but at its heart, it's a market-based solution because it's technology neutral. That issue has a really cool set of strange bedfellows working on it. There's environmental organizations, folks like the Minnesota Environmental Partnership, Friends of the Mississippi River. Fresh Energy, of course, has been working on this for a number of years. The Great Plains Institute has been doing convening work on that issue for, like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years now. I've lost count. But then, there's a statewide working group that was chaired by a colleague of ours from the Laborers International Union. There's folks from the biofuels community that are also participating and helping to shape that policy. And we really are hopeful that that will bear fruit in 2024.
Amazing. Thank you. So I feel like I've kind of grilled you guys and Brenda before you. So thank you so much for making time for me today. We've actually come to the end of all of my questions for now. So I think we can wrap this up. So thank you for giving some insight in what's coming up this legislative session and what it could look like for clean energy here in Minnesota. So thank you, everyone. For
Thanks,
those
Joe.
listening, Thanks. Thanks for, I know you guys are really busy. So these types of podcasts really are, I feel very grateful to have this chunk of your time.
I'm grudgingly grateful for you too, Joe.
That's going to be the
It's a lot
word of
of
the
fun.
year. All right, folks listening, you can stay up to date on Fresh Energy's work at that website, fresh-energy.org, or follow us on social media. We are on Instagram now, and it's actually pretty robust. Kudos to Christine McCormick on the communications team for managing that. Thank you for listening and subscribing to our podcast. You can support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation today. You can do that on the website. I think I'm not going to say the URL. Again, it's going to be in the details for this podcast, so you can click on it there. But you can, when you get to our website, just choose donate in the upper right corner. And now our new closing theme music for the outro. Credit to Palm Psalms, and thank you everyone for listening.